let's talk about one of the most complicated figures from ancient Rome, Seneca. This was a guy who was a philosopher preaching simplicity, a playwright scripting these incredibly bloody tragedies, and a statesman who was the top advisor to one of history's most infamous tyrants. You know, his life really makes you ask a tough question. What happens when your highest ideals smack right into the brutal realities of power?
So this is the Seneca most of us think we know, right? The wise Stoic sage. He wrote these beautiful lines about mastering our desires, valuing every single moment, and finding peace inside ourselves. Honestly, his words sound like they could have been written for a mindfulness app today. But, well, that's really only half the picture.
Because you see, while Seneca was writing about the virtues of living a simple life, he was also one of the wealthiest men in the entire Roman Empire. His fortune was a staggering 300 million sesterces. To give you some context, a Roman legionary soldier at the time earned about 900 sesterces a year. Seneca's wealth was just astronomical.
And that, right there, is the central puzzle. Was he this profound philosopher who was genuinely trying to live his ideals in, completely impossible circumstances? Or was he a brilliant hypocrite, just using philosophy as a really convenient cover for his ambition and his massive fortune? That is the question we are going to unpack.
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to appreciate the sheer scale of the contradictions that just defined his life. It wasn't only about the money, it was woven into pretty much every single thing he did.
I mean, just look at the evidence. He preached virtue, but his main job was advising the Emperor Nero, a guy whose name is basically shorthand for cruelty. He wrote these calm essays on reason and self-control, but then his plays are just filled with gruesome violence and wild, uncontrollable passion. He argued for a life far away from politics, yet for a while he was the most powerful man in Rome besides the emperor himself. Okay, so to make sense of these conflicts, we've got to start with the philosophy he was actually preaching. What did it really mean to be a Stoic back in ancient Rome?
So, the big idea behind Stoicism is to focus on what you can control, which is basically your own thoughts, your judgments, and your actions, and to accept the things you can't control. Things like your wealth, your health, even your reputation. The Stoics called these things indifferent. They aren't good or bad on their own. What matters is how you use them.
And right here, we need to clear up a huge misunderstanding about Stoicism. It is not about becoming an emotionless robot. The goal of what they called apatheia wasn't to feel nothing at all. It was to be free from those really destructive emotions, like blind rage or paralyzing fear. It's all about emotional management, not emotional suppression.
And this is absolutely key. For Seneca, philosophy wasn't some stuffy topic for lectures. It was medicine. It was a practical daily therapy to treat all the anxieties and suffering that come with being human. He really saw it as a toolkit for living a better, more resilient life, especially in a pretty dangerous world.
Okay, so that's the ideal, on paper, but Seneca's life was anything but an academic exercise. Let's turn to the messy reality of his time in the corridors of power, where all these high-minded principles were really put to the test.
I mean, talk about a roller coaster of a career. He gets exiled, then he's recalled to be the tutor for a young Nero. He rises all the way to become the emperor's right-hand man. Then he desperately tries to get out as Nero's madness gets worse and worse. And finally, he's forced to end his own life by the very man he mentored.
For a little while, though, those first 5 years of Nero's rule, Seneca's influence was at its absolute peak. He and the Praetorian prefect, a guy named Burrus, they basically ran the empire. And this period was later remembered as a golden age of good government and stability. For a second there, it really seemed like a philosopher could guide a king.
But of course, that power came with a heavy moral price tag. Not only did he get that massive fortune, some of it from high-interest loans that might have actually helped trigger a bloody revolt in Britain, he was also tangled up in the regime's darkest secrets. He was, at the very least, complicit in the murders of Nero's stepbrother and even Nero's own mother, Agrippina.
So you're probably wondering, how in the world did a Stoic philosopher justify all that? How did he square his teachings with his actions? Well, believe it or not, he actually took on these accusations of hypocrisy himself in his own writings.
So, when it came to his money, this was his main argument. He claimed that wealth itself is just an indifferent. It's morally neutral. A wise person can have it and even use it for good as long as they aren't controlled by it, and as long as they're ready to lose it all in a heartbeat without getting upset. Whether he actually pulled that off is, of course, the $1 million or 300 million Circe question.
And as for his political career, the defense was basically pragmatism. It's that classic argument, right? Is it better to just stand on the sidelines and let a tyrant run wild, or is it better to stay by his side and try to limit the damage? Seneca probably saw himself as a necessary restraint, like a breakwater holding back the worst of Nero's storm.
But you can only hold back a storm for so long. Eventually, it breaks through. As Nero's tyranny became just completely uncontrollable, Seneca's position became impossible. And this all leads us to the final, really dramatic chapter of his life, where his philosophy was put to the ultimate test.
So, in the year 65, a plot to assassinate Nero was uncovered. Now, whether Seneca was really involved is still up for debate, but Nero used it as the perfect excuse to get rid of his old mentor. The order was sent. Seneca had to commit suicide.
The historian Tacitus gives us this incredibly vivid account of Seneca's final moments. With complete calm, he opened his veins. When his friends started crying, he actually scolded them, asking, "Where are your maxims of philosophy?" He kept on dictating his final thoughts as he was dying, a philosopher right to the very end. It was a death deliberately modeled on Socrates, a final public performance of Stoic resolve.
So what do we make of him? What's his legacy? Well, it's as complicated as his life. Early Christians admired him so much that they actually forged letters between him and St. Paul. His violent plays became a huge inspiration for Shakespeare. And today, his practical advice on managing anxiety and using our time better has made him a bit of a star in the modern self-help world.
Maybe the best way to understand him is in his own words. He never claimed to be perfect. He never said he was a wise man. He called himself a proficientus, which means something like one who is making progress. For Seneca, philosophy wasn't some finish line he had crossed. It was a difficult, messy, lifelong journey.
And that really leaves us with a huge, timeless question that Seneca's life just forces us to ask. Can pure ideals ever survive contact with the messy reality of power, wealth, and compromise? Or is the struggle to simply make progress, no matter how flawed that progress might be, the only thing we can really hope for? Seneca doesn't give us an easy answer. And you know what? Maybe that's the most valuable lesson of all.